Welcome back. Yes, indeed. Well, that subject matter still hugging the headlines. As a matter of fact, it was reported, if you saw some of the data today, it says day 6 and panel quizzes Magu. And this time they say 700 million naira training fund. So that and several other matters. It just keeps happening quick and fast. Well, now we've got Honorable Dayobush Alebioshi, who was the pioneer chairman, subcommittee on EFCC. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having me.
And then we also do have Mr. Kenneth Odedeka, who is a legal practitioner. He'll be joining us via Zoom today as well. Thank you for standing by, Mr. Odedeka, but we'll come to you in a moment. But Mr. Bush, while you chaired this subcommittee on EFCC at the time, did it ever occur to you any time whatsoever that perhaps in the future that, look, if certain things weren't done, we may be grappling with this kind of situation with the commission?
We always, the committee then always had its reservations as regards certain parts then. But when you look at the EFCC itself, the act that sets it up, you'd find out that there's a lot on the plate of the EFCC. And when you look at the FCC as well from inception, you discover that every chairman of the EFCC has had one issue or the other. Ribadu had his issues. If you remember then, I believe he, at the end of the day, he was even demoted, if I remember, saying that he had been mistakenly promoted. And prior to that time, the then President Olusegun Obasanjo had said that he had done very well, and that that was the reason why he had gotten that rapid promotion then. And when the Police Service Commission came in after and said, oh, he was promoted in error, I thought, after receiving so much, look at how Farida Waziri left, look at how Lamode left, and of course, we're here with Magu. So
yeah. So what do you make of this then? All of this as it's playing itself out.
Well, it's an inquiry. Definitely, as the chairman, as the pioneer chairman, then we had several petitions against the EFCC. You know, people feeling they were on
the person or the operation of the EFCC.
About the EFCC itself.
Oh, okay.
And of course, we're still dealing with this issue of. When you look at the era, EFCC is not seen as an institution yet. You see it as the era of Nuhu Ribadu, the era of Farida Aziri, the era of, so it's tied to each era.
Which brings up the question of that succession.
Correct.
I've actually been concerned, as you are, about the fact that each leadership, the top person at the EFCC has always had to leave in controversial circumstances. Is that a concern for you?
A bit of yes and a bit of no. I would say that, like I said, what were the reasons for them to have left? And you'd find out at every time we entertained petitions upon petitions against the EFCC, particularly the heads of those heads of the EFCC in itself. Either some people feeling that they have been unduly treated. There was an issue then where some had even felt whenever they were going to effect arrests, that they were already convicted before the public eye. Because they would go with the press, they lead them out in handcuffs, and of course that image remains in your head, in the head of the people watching. So that's kind of affected things.
All right. Now, let me begin with Mr. Odedeka, and pardon me. Mr. Odedeka, from what we see today, they say, well, panel orders Magu's offices in Lagos, Abuja locked up. 18 of his aides also locked up out of their offices. 3 bulletproof SUVs recovered from him. Panel arrest operatives of states. So, look, given the history of of Mr. Magu, because I think somebody else is on that seat at the moment, did you ever think that, look, having seen how things are played out about his confirmation And now, did you think that we were going to get to this point where we'll be grappling with dealing with this kind of inquiry, unearthing these things about his position at any time whatsoever?
Good morning. Good morning and thank you. Oh, definitely. You see, when there's illegality and something is hoisted or foisted on illegality, this is what you will get. I remember stating very clearly that the law that provides that a Magu ought to be cleared by the Senate, confirmed by the Senate, had been breached. Because when the Senate did not confirm Magu, what ought to have happened was that another president ought to have been sent to the Senate for confirmation. Not having sent Magu and retaining him to continue running as acting as EFCC chairman made a nonsense of the law. Because what was the purpose of sending him for confirmation in the first place if he didn't need that confirmation? So because of the fact that he was being sustained by illegality, then he had to be have allegiance to the forces that were sustaining him and would do only those things that please those people. And when you act like that, when you owe such allegiance, you cannot work for Nigeria or for the country. You can only work for certain interests. So if, well, the law still says that you're innocent until proven guilty.
Yes, but Mr. Liga, apologies to jump in, but we need to go to break. We'll come back to you when we return, and so you can conclude your thoughts in just a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Mr. Tidika, you were making a point about illegality, his confirmation at the time, whether or not somebody else should have been represented. But at that particular time, in that context, there was a reason why the president stood by him. So it was expected, it was believed to be above board. The president, at least to that extent, the information he had on him. So would it then be fair or justified to say, well, because of that, this is why we are where we are today? Well, what's the connection?
It should not be correct to say that that was all the information the president had, because the DSS report, which was sent to the Senate, which the Senate, I think, president then read on the floor of the Senate, was available to the president because it was available to us, the public. So that it wouldn't be correct to say that the information the president had of Magu at that time showed he was above board. I'm not saying he wasn't, but that's not the information we all had. We had information that he wasn't above board. He might have been, I don't know, but the information was that he wasn't. Now, if I am not above board, and if I'm being sustained by certain forces, I would necessarily pander to the interest of those forces. That is already corruption on its own. And if I believe that the forces that are sustaining me are such that are very strong, I will become reckless and do things I want to do, not because the law says so, but because that's what I want to do, or that's what my principles.
Shed some light on this? Pardon me, because when you say forces that put him there, which forces could this be? Could it be, are they over and above the president who submitted his name at the time for clarification?
You know, what problem we have now is we have issues that are in the public domain, and you expect some authoritative stance by the president, not the presidency. You never get that. So when Magu's name was sent ostensibly by the president, and the Senate said, no, we won't confirm this gentleman, and he wasn't replaced, but was not meant to be acting, in my opinion, unlawfully, till when he was now removed last week. Some people, some persons, some forces, maybe the president was the main force, but some forces definitely were sustaining Magu's stay in office. And those forces apparently would appear to be quite strong because nobody could touch him and he could do whatever he liked. Now that these things are unraveling, we've seen that things are not how some people thought them to be. Some of us have said then that he was incapable of running EFCC for several reasons, including the one I just said now. Because
Let me
if
bring
you
in
are
Mr.
not
Dyer on
on the
this
law,
one.
with the law,
Okay. Well, I haven't heard that. And then speaking about capacity, his capacity to perform. Well, I'm not sure that they expected, having presented his name, if you stood by him at the time, you certainly wouldn't expect to hear these kind of things, as it were. So one wonders how, were you able to distinguish between what he says about the president and the presidency?
First of all, it's important for us to understand that what's going on right now is an inquiry. To find, and where he would have to answer certain questions.
Yeah.
Of course, some things would have made the presidency, in quote now, uncomfortable for that committee to have been set up to say, I need you to look into this. Now, is it true that, I remember it was Dino Melai who stood up on the floor of the Senate then and read out a report. But let's not forget that at that particular time, there was a lot of politicking going on at the time where there ought to have been the business of governance happening. Now, to be fair to the DSS, we need to, total respect to the DSS, but we also need to understand that there were some people in the National Assembly at certain times. There was a case where I'm not sure which IG of police it was who went to the National Assembly and said, there are some people here, even convicted, who are members of the National Assembly.
I think there was a senator who was in the police.
Exactly.
Police
and
office.
You go through, don't forget that for you to be a member of the National Assembly or to hold public office, you would have had to go through screening. But then some people wondered then that, wait a minute, how come the DSS missed those people but were able to get all the necessary information on Magu? Now, the only person who can actually answer the reason to have stuck by Magu would be the president himself. But as a leader in leadership, when you present somebody, you would have done your homework on that person. And you would have a reason for appointing that person to think, I believe this is somebody who can actually fight that case of corruption, especially at the point where coming in, one thing that was sold to the Nigerian public was that President Buhari was going to fight corruption. If the same president who had stood by him now says that, wait a minute, I'm uncomfortable with certain things, and decides, let's give him fair hearing, I want you to conduct an inquiry first, I don't think there should be an issue there.
But you also heard him say that it was illegal for the man to remain in office while not confirmed by the Senate.
Though I'm not a lawyer, but if it was illegal, this is Nigeria. A lot of Nigerian lawyers would have gone to court for free to say this is illegal. Do you know how many cases we read about saying some lawyers approached the courts? How come no lawyer had approached the courts based on the illegality? So it makes you question if truly there was any something being not morally accepted, rather, does not make it legally wrong.
Perhaps what the argument would be, the EFCC Act provides that the Senate ought to confirm the chairman, but if the Senate didn't confirm the chairman, then he's probably not supposed to be
the act. Where the act, the Constitution empowers the president, gives the president certain rights, and where the act, I don't want to say offend. I don't want to use the word offend. Where the act kind of tackles the Constitution would have to take precedence. So if the president is allowed to have, the question is, did he break any laws? If he had broken laws, definitely a lot of people would have risen up then.
Speaking about the man himself, Mr. Magu,
yes.
Why would you want to act? Because if this hadn't happened, he would have remained acting chairman for 5 years. I mean, we know in some other claims, if they present you once, twice, and they're not even, and you perceive something is amiss, they're not comfortable with confirming you in spite of what integrity or what track record you might have had, in spite of the president backing you, shouldn't you as a president say, you know what, if they have questions, if they won't, Mr. President, honorably, I resign from this position. But he's been acting for 5 years.
if we're talking about honor, we need to look at precedence. How many people, what is the precedence? What's the benchmark for precedence has been, in public service so far?
Somebody has to start it.
Well, maybe he chose not to start it.
Okay, but as it is now, he knew that being in that position, you cannot afford to have skeletons in your cupboard.
Oh, absolutely.
And look at all we're reading. Who would have thought that you'd be reading about all of these kind of things? So it's shocking to a lot of people.
Well, if you have to start from somewhere, let's see how it goes. But one thing I'm certain about is, for there to be respect for the rule of law, there has to be trust for the rule of law.
And speaking about the rule of law, let's bring back Mr. Odidika on this one. Look, do you think that the government, can have something from the point of law here, particularly when they say they're relying on the Tribunals of Inquiry Act? Can they get somewhere with this based on that act?
So this is not the first time we're having things like this. The problem with Nigeria is that we always hide our heads in the sand and pretend that nothing is going amiss. Like the person, the honorable said, I made my point clearly, and I made it at that time. One of those I tried to go to court for some other issues that the president found distasteful. They were.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we lost him at that point. So I was trying to make a point about going to courts and things like that. But as it is now, the reason why we're asking about this is because part of that Tribunals Inquiry Act was talking about, look, whatever evidence you have here may not be used in the criminal proceedings. So one wonders, the powers, the limits of functionality of this panel, they can't say he's guilty or otherwise. It's the courts that have the powers to do that.
Absolutely.
They can come up with recommendations. So the next thing is do you expect that he will go before the courts and answer questions?
Well, that would lie squarely on the lap of the Attorney General, and of course the ICPC. Being the chairman of EFCC, why was ICPC formed? ICPC was formed to take on corrupt practices, official corrupt practices, and if he, being an official of government, is found wanting, then ICPC can move in to say, well, now we're going to prosecute for reasons of corruption where that has been established.
Okay. Well, we'll have Mr. Odidika back now. Could you please go ahead and conclude your thoughts?
I was saying that the law must be respected. Otherwise, there's no purpose to it. Why have a law that won't be obeyed? Now, rule of law. The rule of law starts by the law being obeyed and implemented. Now, whether they go under the Tribunal Act or any other law for that matter, even if it's not a judicial panel of inquiry, they can find out exactly if Magu did anything wrong and they think he did wrong. But as usual, we are full of drama. I don't even see the need for the so-called suspension. In my opinion, what would have happened would have been Magu should have been set aside and then sent to Senate for confirmation. Then Magu would have been investigated, and the findings now used to either put him on trial or let him go home. But no, we have to make all this noise, muddy the place up. I'm telling you right now that nothing will come out of this. Yes, well, Justice Ayo Salami is a respected jurist. However, ultimately, this is political. So whatever they find or do not find, will not amount to anything. This is not the first time, it's not going to be the last time. We are full of drama. All theory, no substance.
What makes you say that, Mr. Odidika?
Have you had the stories flying around? Just like Disney's $20 billion. You see, when they started this, I'm trying to moderate my words. But when they started this thing, I said it that it was just a show. Ultimately, nobody's really going to jail. I don't mean Magu. I mean when Magu started became the EFCC chairman.
Mr. Odidika, don't you think that there's an issue here? I mean, if you look at the previous chairman, Nuhu Ribadu was removed under controversial circumstances. Farid Waziri was removed under controversial circumstances. Lamode was also, removed under controversial circumstances. And this And just as you have said, it seemed like every allegation that came against every one of them, nothing, really came out of it. So don't you see a problem of a pattern here? You referenced illegality the other time, that the Magu is having this problem because he was not confirmed by the Senate. But the same thing that happened to the previous chairman of the EFCC. All of them were confirmed, yet they also had similar circumstances. What do you think the problem is really?
There are something else I said about Nigeria. I said we're full of drama, fury, no substance. Those ones that were removed, all of them will always be removed under such circumstance. Always. Because the office of the chairman of EFCC has been deified. He's a god. So, as long as he's a god, seeking to do what pleases him, even trampling the law in the process, being defended by lawyers, his actions being defended by prominent lawyers when he's doing it. Some of them are now with Magu personally now asking for bail and all that.
Okay. One moment.
People who
if you say, Mr. Didika, one moment. If you say that the office of the chairman of the EFCC is deified, it presupposes then that there is too much power in the hands of the EFCC chairman. Are you calling for a review of the law?
Oh, definitely. But anyway, that's another forum. It is too powerful. It is, yes, it's executive chairman, but excuse my French, the executiveness of that executive is too powerful. And being Nigeria, because, sorry?
Let's bring that same matter to Honorable Bushalabi.
There's also a point similar to this one, where some are asking that, look, perhaps in context of reviewing the law, if at all they think it's worth the review, should we keep having a serving police person head the EFCC?
I always had an issue with that because it boxes it in. It insists that to a certain extent, if I remember well, it says that whoever will head the EFCC must be either a serving or a retired. Should be an acting or a serving or a retired
security operative
of no less, no lower than the rank of an ACP, which means that even at that point they had used the police force as a benchmark. Now, I've always been, even as the chairman, I had spoken with my colleagues then. I'd been uncomfortable with that clause. I agree with the legal practice, the legal practitioner on the other end, saying that there's need to review it. But when in Nigeria, in this climate, laws are meant to be domestic, if you know what I mean. International laws can't be, they don't always work. So when you look at the goings-ons, the peculiarity of your society, you would have to make available remedies that will actually cure the ailments. So
some of those who argued, made that point, supported it, thought that it was in the genealogy of the police to act maybe some, there's always a default mode that this kind of things happen. So would it be fair, or should we then say, if you want to review, what should that review specify?
Well, first of all, to talk about it being in the genealogy of the police, I mean, there's so many fine officers out there. But the issue is, there's been this constant talk about looking at the process, reviewing the process through which they emerge as officers in the police force. So if that's faulty, it would definitely affect them serving, the route, where the route is faulty, it would affect them serving somebody emerging as the chairman of the FCC. So what you need to put in place would be checks, and not to take away the powers, but to put in place checks and balances to make sure that the same way you have the office of the president is very powerful in Nigeria or in any clime. However, you have checks and balances in place through the other arms of government.
Okay, Mr. Odedika, a quick one before we go. We're winding down. If there were to be a review, what caliber person would you like to see head that position?
A very intelligent, educated, enlightened person with deep knowledge of how security agencies actually work. Somebody who will have undergone such training. And
No matter if he's a police officer.
Somebody who doesn't have to be a police officer at all. Does not have to be a police officer. Could be, but doesn't have to be. And in any case, even if you're a police officer, not a serving police officer.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, we'll have to thank you both for talking to us on this matter. It's a matter that is unfolding. It's not going anywhere yet. It's still a panel. We don't know what happens, if there will be recommendations, and what happens thereafter. But we do thank you all. Mr. Dayo Bushalebioshu, former chairman subcommittee on the AFCC, as well as Mr. Kenneth Odedika, a legal practitioner. We're back in a moment to look at what you are saying in just a moment. Don't go away.